I'm not seeing the live. Good day to you all. I'm very happy to have you in the audience for this seminar, for this webinar, sorry. We are so used to seminars and webinars. I'm happy to bring you this webinar from Mauritius. Well, as most of the world, we too have been through the turmoil of COVID-19, but we are happy to report that thanks to an excellent management of the crisis by government and the discipline of the Mauritian population, we have had very, very low level of casualties. In fact, no cases for the last 2 months. And we have reopened business and all activities have resumed since the 1st of June. Today's webinar is about Mauritius Africa strategy post-COVID. Mauritius is in Africa. Mauritius is Africa, although we are not on the continent mainland. A Mauritius strategy for broad and deeper interaction with the African continent has been there for the past 20 years. 23% of Mauritian exports is to African countries, and 17% of our imports is from African countries. Companies from Mauritius have invested in a spectrum of sectors on the mainland, in the production of sugar, in Tanzania, in Kenya, in Ivory Coast, in Uganda, in ICT services in Namibia, in private hospitals, in agro industry in Uganda. International companies like Huawei conduct their spread in Africa from Mauritius, and Adarco from Mauritius has invested in gas in Mozambique, and Olam from Mauritius again has invested in 19 African countries in agriculture. So today we want to talk to you about how Mauritius can provide you with a base to connect and to do business with Africa. To do that, we will have 6 speakers, 2 of which, Monique Labat and Mr. McLean from South Africa, and 4 top private sector operators from Mauritius. And I will start with Ken Poonoosamy, who is the acting CEO for the Enterprise Development Board. Now, Ken Poonoosamy has 25 years been operating in the economic sector, first from the Freeport. He was at the beginning of the Mauritius Freeport Authority and developed the Freeport. Then he joined the Board of Investment, and he has headed the international business services development throughout the world. And he's now the acting CEO of EDB, the Enterprise Development Board. So I'll give the floor to Ken Poonoosamy to talk to you about what has been up to now the connection between Mauritius and Africa, and what are the prospects and opportunities open for business to be done from Mauritius into and on the continent of Africa. Over to you, Ken.
Thank you, Amede. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. In fact, it's a pleasure for me to be part of this eminent panel talking about the Mauritius Africa strategy. I would not say post-COVID because we're still in a COVID situation, and therefore I would focus my intervention this afternoon on really how we see the situation from the Mauritian perspective, and also what could be the opportunities that this new, I would say, economic environment world situation provides for Mauritius, but also broadly for Africa as a whole. Now, the economic situation in Mauritius, we've managed to be able to go through a development path that has transitioned Mauritius from being a monocrop to industrial development to now services-based economy. We are today an economy that is well diversified, robust, and that has also over the years been able to capture some of the opportunities and also address all the different challenges that we had on our way. Now, the COVID-19, the pandemic, has created certainly a lot of issues for the world, not only in terms of the economic situation, the contraction, but also sanitary health situation, crisis, but also it has created job losses. And what we call today the new normal of the COVID pandemic is something which we are still yet to grasp what it will be, what it will entail for small economies like Mauritius, but also for different countries across the world. But one thing for sure is that the pandemic has disrupted significantly the lives of people. It has shifted drastically the economic powers with major demand, supply, and also financial shocks. And all along, it is also creating issues in terms of income and jobs, in terms of job losses. We are projecting in Africa that there could be around 150 million jobs at stake. The African Development Bank has estimated the loss to be around 35 to 100 billion due to the fall in raw material prices. The World Economic Forum is projecting a contraction of 8%. So in the midst of all this, the crisis situation, it is creating, I would say, a large-scale reimagination of the African economic structure, service deliveries, but also change in terms of the strategy from deglobalization to perhaps regionalization, outsourcing to nearshoring, and also market competition to something of consolidation for companies to remain African. So this afternoon, what I would like to talk about is what I see from the Economic Development Board, some of the opportunities that we see going through the COVID situation. What we see also is that there are a number of opportunities to boost local manufacturing, to formalize small businesses, but also to upgrade urban infrastructure. And I will talk as the first opportunity to be the ICT sector as an enabler of growth for the Mauritius Africa strategy. We are seeing today, in fact, the very fact that we are connected through this webinar is a new mindset, is a new way of engagement with the international community, business community in the world. The concept of work from home, flexible hours, it has become the new norm in the professional front. And there's a growing tendency towards less in-person meetings as businesses shift more towards remote working, distance learning, training, and also more video conferencing. If we take the case of Zoom video communication stock, it has increased by 45% since February 2020. Microsoft Teams has climbed up its prices by 40% in just a week. Therefore, digital platforms are becoming very common and popular as consumers readapt their patterns of consumption. And what we see from the Economic Development Board as new opportunities and growth avenues, we see the cloud computing as cloud-based services as being a potential enabler for that growth, as a potential for growth. What we see today is that a number of businesses, whether we call it software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, are growing in importance. And a lot of businesses are shifting towards these applications, these models, to build their competitiveness, to address the current issues about mobility. And we see that a lot of these services, the cloud services, are increasing in terms of momentum. We see also the question of cybersecurity. Increase in incidents lately has been noted, and a lot of organizations are increasing their offer of work from home policies. and they demand reliable infrastructure, IT infrastructure and security of home networks. So these are becoming new trends. The global cybersecurity market is also growing quite rapidly. We're talking about digital health technologies, and we see in Mauritius also we have made some headway. We're starting to get certain companies, startups, to get involved in digital health technologies. We're talking about e-commerce and e-retailing. And finally, we're talking about online education, EdTech. A number of companies, small startups already start catching some of the opportunities in that space. There is, for example, the Open University that has developed a massive open online courses. There are startups like Augment Training. I will not mention names, but we are saying that these are the new drivers of growth. The opportunities for cloud in the region and potentially Mauritius as a strategy for Africa is, I would say, significant. And with a focused and coordinated approach, we see that there could be a potential. We know that certain of the big companies, along with global technology vendors, are already in that space. And certainly Mauritius can emerge as a cloud center of excellence. So this is potentially, from our perspective, what we see as growth potential for Mauritius in this climate of uncertainty, and also in this climate where we are yet to know what the new normal will look like in the next few months and the years to come. The second aspect which I would like to talk about is really the case for the pharmaceutical industry in Africa, and also how Mauritius can position itself to capture some of the opportunities. During the crisis, we've seen that a few companies have repositioned themselves from producing luxury brands for international markets to focusing on the production of PPE and masks for the local market, but also for the region. We never thought that sanitizers would have an export market, and yet we are looking at it today seriously. And in the pharmaceutical industry, there has been considerable disruption in the supply chain. If we take India, for example, there has been certain bans on products for export. What this implies is that tomorrow, if there is a sanitary crisis, some of these countries might not be in a position to supply pharmaceutical products. So we believe that it is the opportune time, and it's a call from Mauritian businesses to look in this direction. How? As I said initially in my remarks, from deglobalization to regionalization. And how can we leverage on the strength that Mauritius has to develop a pharmaceutical industry that could be resilient, competitive, but also export-led? There is already a market for that. If we take the case of Nigeria, 70% of prescribed medications are produced from active ingredients primarily sourced from China and India. Pandemic has seen how volatile, weak, and fragile this could be if there is a disruption in supply, and what that implies for the health situation, livelihoods, and lives of people across the continent. With the prices of pharmaceutical ingredients manufactured in China rising, and an availability of supply due to disruptions, the risk of shortages is inevitable. So this is why we believe that there could be a potential for us in the pharmaceutical industry. The third element, perhaps very quickly, Amédée, I would touch on is on food security. We believe that Mauritius has developed a certain competency. We have managed to provide certain of the products outside of Mauritius. We talk about the poultry sector, and we feel that there could be a potential for us to look at in this direction for other products as well. And we feel that today with this situation, the regionalization drive, we could potentially look at how certain products can be manufactured, or perhaps Madagascar as an example could be used as a way for us to cultivate certain products, and the processing is done in Mauritius. So I would say that all throughout Mauritius has been able to ward off certain of the challenges, to position itself as a country that has attracted investment, has nurtured businesses, And we've managed throughout the years, when we look at the economic trajectory of Mauritius, to harness the opportunities that have been presented to us. Today, there is an opportunity that is presented with this crisis for us to look at how best we can transform those challenges into opportunities. And what I mentioned as the potential sectors of development could be a situation for us tomorrow to drive growth for Mauritius, but also to create jobs for the future of Mauritians. I will stop here, Amédée. I don't know if my 8 minutes have been exhausted, but I will be happy to answer questions later on. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ken, for your presentation and the points you have brought. And from what you have said, I think there are two things that come out clearly. One is that question of nearshoring. The globalization has, in fact, exploded manufacturing, production of goods in so many diverse destinations and origin that COVID has showed us that when a catastrophe happens, natural or medical, the whole logistic and supply chain can break down, which therefore prompts us to think about now nearshoring, meaning manufacturing closer to home. And closer to home means closer to Africa, means in Africa itself, in Mauritius for Africa. I think that's a very strong point that you have brought up. The second point that you have brought up is about developing now on fast track our production capacity from the agricultural products that we are already producing and transforming them for our own consumption instead of just sending the commodities to somewhere to be transformed and sent back to us. And here again, both African countries and Mauritius can work in synergy to look at the supply chain, not from the perspective of one country having the full supply chain, but of the supply chain spread on 2 or 3 neighboring countries, and Mauritius can play part in that. Thank you, Ken. Now, to those of you in the audience, there will be a Q&A session at the end, and you have the possibility of typing in your questions, which will be noted, and I'll raise your questions at the end, and the last 10 minutes will be for the Q&A. Thank you for that. I'll now call on Lilowtee Rajmun-Jooseery. Now, Lilowtee Rajmun is the director of the Mauritius Exports Association. That association actually represents 80% of those who are producing goods for export from Mauritius, for export around the world, to the US, to Europe, to certain African countries, to South Africa, and elsewhere. That lady, Lilowtee, represents those 80% of those who are in the production of goods and exports of these products around the world. Lilowtee will address you now both on the opportunities in the manufacturing sector, but also from the logistics perspective, as she has been involved and still is very much involved in the logistics infrastructure in Mauritius. Over to you, Lilowtee. Over to you, Lilowtee. Over to you, Lilowtee.
All right, sorry, some IT problems. Hi, hello everybody, and thank you, Mr. Daga, for giving me that opportunity to speak about an interesting and always, for me, it's a passionating theme to talk about the manufacturing and export sector of our country. Coincidence is that tomorrow we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the export manufacturing sector of our country. This sector is the second oldest sector of our economy and has, for sure, it has undergone lots of challenges, but it's still a strong and resilient sector. Today, it is contributing some 13% of the GDP of the country. Quite interesting is that the sector has constantly reinvented itself over the last 5 decades, be it in terms of product and market. In terms of product, in the year 70s, we started with the production of textile and garment, but over the years, we diversify our basket of products. The export sector today is producing a variety of products, namely seafood, be it in terms of fish and fish product and aquaculture, medical devices, jewelry, electronic products, agro-processed products, as well as high premium rums. The government, together with the private sector, would like to attract more investment in some more high-tech and value-added products. This is what we are currently working on at the level of MEXA and the government. Now, in terms of market, the export sector has been exporting for the last 5 decades to the traditional markets, namely Europe and US and South Africa. But the Mauritian government and the private sector recognizes that recognizes the huge potential that the African market can offer to Mauritius. For sure, we have been exporting some 13% of our total export to South Africa, but we are exploring more and more the other African market. And encouraging feedback is that our product is highly valued by the African producers, be it in terms of quality and price. To help us accentuate our market penetration, recently in the national budget, the government has come up with incentive to set up Mauritius warehouse in Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique. This warehouse concept will bring our Mauritian product closer to the potential African client. Ladies and gentlemen, let me inform you, ladies and gentlemen, I would like, in fact, to say that it is the right time for any potential industrial investor to be in Mauritius. And my statement is backed by the following reason. First of all, we have some conducive, the government is offering conducive fiscal incentive to the local manufacturing companies that are exploring the export market. Namely, if you're namely the level, the government is offering a 3% corporate tax for companies which are producing and exporting to the African market. Secondly, there is no VAT and import duty on raw materials. Thirdly, on investment, on plant and machinery, government has come up with investment tax credit facilities. In terms of infrastructure and utilities, we must say that in Mauritius, we have a constant supply of utilities and the price is quite competitive at international level. On labor front, in Mauritius, we have a pool of skilled labor that can maneuver the new technologies that are coming in. And we are constantly working with the academic institution to upgrade the skills of our labor force. In terms of logistics, I must say that we have Mauritius offer very competitive logistics services, be it in terms of warehousing, customs brokerage, trucking, and so on. We have, in terms of customs clearance, at import level, our containers are being cleared in a minimum of 3 to 5 hours. We are exporting today to, in terms of sea connectivity and air connectivity, we have frequent maritime connectivity to Africa. For Durban, it's a question of some 3 to 5 days that we can connect to Durban. And in terms of air connectivity as well, we have frequent flights to the African continent. To help us be competitive in our air freight cost and logistic cost, the government is also offering rebate scheme for both maritime and air connectivity. We have also to say that the Mauritius enjoys some trade, free trade, duty-free and quota-free access to some key imported markets around the world. We have some trade agreements, namely with EU, UK, and US. But on the African market, we've got the SADC and COMESA, and recently we are working on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. These trade agreements offer us duty-free and quota-free access to these markets. So basically, we would like to encourage potential investors to come in and avail of those facilities and measures. And recently, we must say that we have been having some very important investment into the country. For instance, lately, some Asian investors have been exploring Mauritius for warehousing possibilities as well as manufacturing possibilities for their e-commerce business. E-commerce business is picking up worldwide, and the Asian investors are exploring Mauritius because of its proximity to the African continent, to use Mauritius as a warehousing base, as well as to conduct some manufacturing activities finally to export to Africa, all the time enjoying the trade agreements, namely COMESA, SADC, and the forthcoming African Continental Free Trade Agreement. I must say, in terms of trade agreement as well, Mauritius has concluded bilateral agreements with Turkey, with Pakistan, with China. Negotiation has completed, but we are waiting ratification of our agreement. For India, we are also under discussion and negotiation for trade agreement, free trade agreement with India as well. So basically, recently in the budget that government has come up also with some interesting measures so that investors can come not only for work purposes, but also their family can come over with them so that they can enjoy the safe and very lively social life of our country. So basically, Amédée, I will stop here to hand over to you, so that I will take over in terms of question and answers afterward.
Thank you so much, Lilowtee. I think you have very well explained the attractiveness of the Mauritius manufacturing sector, a sector that has now more than 50 years in existence, a sector that produces things that people would not think about. For example, many people don't realize that we are a country which does not have any diamond mine, yet we have some enterprise in Mauritius who are doing diamond cutting and exporting to the world. That's because Mauritius is attractive enough and the labor is skilled enough to do such a job for diamonds coming from Canada to be cut in Mauritius and exported to Europe. Let me now call upon Dr. McLean Sibanda. Dr. McLean Sibanda is the Managing Director of Bigen Global Limited. He is the regional manager of the company. Now, his company, Bigen Global, is operating in Mauritius, and its headquarters is in Mauritius, and it has subsidiaries in East and West Africa, with ports of entry in Kenya and Ghana, and offices in Botswana, Mozambique, and Zambia. I also want to underline that until September 2019, Dr. McLean Sibanda served as the president of the Advisory Council of the International Association of Science and Technology Parks. Dr. Sibanda, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daga, for the introduction, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor and privilege to be part of this webinar. As introduced, Bigen Global Limited is a company that has been incorporated in Mauritius since 2016. We're part of the Bigen group of companies, which was established in South Africa about 49 years ago. Infrastructure development specialists. We believe that infrastructure is an enabler for economic development. And as such, we focus on sustainable infrastructure development right across the continent. And so part of the reason why we set up in Mauritius were really 4 reasons. The first one was to access capital for infrastructure projects in the rest of the continent. As we've been going into the rest of the continent, we found that many countries do not have the funds to be able to fund their own infrastructure development. And our positioning in Mauritius has enabled us, in essence, as I will illustrate shortly, to find partners that are able to help us to prepare projects and in some cases also to fund those particular projects. The second reason was the diversification in terms of our own risk as a company. The group originally based in South Africa with the rand also falling, and yet in most of the African countries where we operate, the main currency is the dollar. And so by basing ourselves in Mauritius, we were then able to hedge our risk in that particular regard. The third reason is the environment in Mauritius. Mauritius provides an enabling environment for doing business. And we've seen it with the various reports, whether it be World Economic Forum or other studies, in terms of Mauritius being a leader in terms of ease of doing business. And indeed, we've experienced that ourselves as a company. We have a great management company, or Korean, that is able to take care of much of the compliance requirements so that we can be able to focus on what we know best to do, which is infrastructure development. And then the fourth reason for being in Mauritius has been, in essence, to find partners as well. And that is also linked to the stable macroeconomic and political environment. And then, the tax advantages are very minimal for us, given the diversity of geographies where we operate and the various tax treaties that Mauritius has with those particular companies. Now, as an infrastructure development company, we are now in over 19 countries throughout the African continent. and our focus is in agriculture, water and sanitation, real estate, energy, transport, and health. And we've seen with COVID, I think COVID-19 has highlighted some of the challenges that are faced by the rest of the continent. Water is becoming quite key in terms of addressing COVID-19, and yet many countries do not have running water. As far as health is concerned, we've seen the lack of capacity and infrastructure in terms of healthcare. The hospitals have not been able to cope with the number of admissions. Many countries do not even have a capability to take on board admissions. And this is an area where we're actually focusing on. These are areas of opportunity that we see post COVID-19. So what have been the benefits for us thus far in terms of locating in Mauritius? The first one is that as a Mauritian business, we've got access to numerous opportunities that are being presented by the Economic Development Board and the Mauritius Africa Fund. And these are opportunities in terms of expansion into countries such as Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Kenya, even Madagascar. And we have been in discussions with the Mauritius Africa Fund and reviewing some of those particular projects, including special economic zones in those territories. The second one has been access to strategic partners. And in Mauritius, we've been able to find incredible strategic partners. One of them is Kukuza Project Development Company, which is also co-funded by the African Development Bank. And this is a project preparatory fund. And we know that project preparation is one of the hurdles in terms of getting infrastructure projects off the ground in most of the countries. And we're working with Kukuza on a number of projects and unpacking those so that those projects can be realized. I've already mentioned Okorian, one of our partners, and through Okorian, we've also had access to other development financing institutions that have come on board to help us review projects and help us understand some of the landscape in terms of what is required to be able to finance some of these particular projects. As a business, we have a number of projects that Bigen Global Limited has rolled out in the continent. We've been working in Tanzania with the Rural Electrification Agency, supporting them in terms of their own strategy around rural electrification. In water and sanitation, one of our flagship projects is in Botswana, the North-South Carrier Water Transfer Project, which is in essence a 360-kilometer strategic water transfer system, moving water from the north of Botswana to the capital, Gaborone. And this particular project has given regional economic growth and quality of life to the people of Botswana. In Rwanda, we've been involved with real estate. We were involved with the Rugarama initial design and part of the planning of that particular project in Kigali. And then there's a number of huge real estate projects that we do as a group in South Africa, supporting the South African government in terms of affordable housing. And that is the case as well in Kenya. In Kenya, we are working with a number of partners, local partners, and I'll come back to our strategy around local partners to look at the Konza specialized hospital. And that's also a project that we're discussing with Kukuza. One of the things that we realize is that when we go into a country, it is quite important for us to find credible local partners, people that can be able to support us in rolling out our strategies, rolling out infrastructure projects. We believe that we need to do good whilst doing business, and therefore we look at the entire value chain of infrastructure development. We look at how the communities are going to benefit. So socio-economic development is quite critical for us. We place a lot of value in terms of jobs, and indeed infrastructure creates jobs. And we've seen that with the African Union focus on infrastructure this year, so that it can unlock a number of jobs. The last but second thing that I'd like to add is also in transport. So transport is a critical part of Bigen's business. In transport and logistics, we're involved in Namibia with the Walvis Bay to Kransbeck railway refurbishment. And a new interesting project that we're involved in is the North-South corridor, moving cargo from road to rail. And that way you minimize the damage on the road infrastructure, but also you start to bring down the cost of moving goods along that particular corridor. We have it now established a new company that we are incorporating in Mauritius called Bimidco, with another South African company called Musina Intermodal Terminal, where we're going to provide some of the wagons and also the logistic support to shippers in the north of Zambia, including Zambia through Zimbabwe, to move mining products such as copper, chrome, cobalt, all the way to the port of Durban. As one of my colleagues, Dr. Mtanda Zongwenya, notes in his thought leadership article that is available on our website, bigengroup.com, he says the COVID-19 pandemic has magnified systemic and structural challenges that already existed in the economies of many countries. In the case of the North-South corridor, we see that in terms of the congestion of trucks at the borders. So as we speak right now, the border between Zimbabwe and South Africa is congested because trucks cannot move owing to the testing for COVID. Whereas if the rail infrastructure was actually operating cross borders, those particular goods would be able to move to the port of Durban. And so therefore, it's quite important when thinking of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and its phase one emphasis on movement of goods and persons, that we look at logistics and transportation so that we can enable the movement of goods and services throughout the African continent. And I think lastly to end is that we're always looking for partners, people that have got a passion for infrastructure development in the continent, and we partner with investors. We also partner with locals in the countries where we focus. So in East Africa, we focus in Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, and in West Africa, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, focus areas with Nigeria, and in the rest of SADC, we work in Botswana, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and of course, the RAN Common Monetary Area of South Africa, Lesotho, Swaziland, and Namibia. Thank you very much, Mr. Darga. Let me stop here.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sibanda. You made a compelling presentation of the journey that you have had in the last 4 years in Mauritius and how it has been gratifying for you to be in Mauritius and the facilities you have enjoyed to be able to expand your business to a number of African countries. One of the points that you have mentioned is about logistics, and I'm going to call Jacques Juniorville to take the floor, but before I do that, let me also add to it, which Mr. Juniorville will expand on, that Mauritius has been contemplating seriously developing from its airport an air cargo hub to service the landlocked countries in Africa, taking into consideration that the cost of carrying goods from, for example, from Dar es Salaam to Lusaka is even more expensive than cost of carrying goods from China to Dar es Salaam. So that air cargo hub is on the cards now, and I'll call Jacques Mauritius to talk about his company, to talk about his projects, and to talk about the free port, which is both the marine free port, but also a free port next to the airport. Now, Jacques Juniaville is the CEO of Omnicane Limited, which is in the sugar since decades. He is the chairperson of Omnicane Thermal Energy Operations. He is also the chairperson of Omnicane Milling Operations, the director of Real Good Food Company, and his company is also involved in tourism, and he's a director of Southern Cross Tourist Company Limited. Jacques, I invite you to take the floor. Jacques, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Amédée. Thank you, everyone. I'm really honored to be on this platform today. My company, Omnicane, we are in Mauritius, incorporated since 1926. And we operate an industrial cluster in Mauritius, started around sugar, but we've diversified now, and we do produce refined sugar, alcohol, and electricity in a circular economy model, which means that obviously when we produce a product, the byproducts of this production are used as the entrance to another production. So our target is to go for almost zero waste. So we've been fairly integrated industrial-wise recently. Now, the COVID obviously has brought many challenges. I think if there was no COVID, we would not have had this platform today. So the connectivity has been lost on one side, but improved on other ways. And it has forced us to change a bit our strategies. First of all, to think more, as Ken was saying, to go more regional, less global, more regional, and focus more on the local market and the regional market. So I think there's a great challenge there. But also we've seen security issues, I would say, being locked in COVID. We think about food security, energy security, sanitary security, and we've tried to adjust our strategies according to these pillars, I would say. So in terms of food security, the strategy is now to produce more locally, and also go for more value addition in our products. We are very much involved into exporting commodities, and the idea would be to go for much more value addition regionally, locally, be a bit more sophisticated, create brands that could be used in the region. Obviously, maybe seal partnerships in the region to go for these markets. For example, in the UK, we are present, and we do produce for companies like Mars and Kellogg's for the UK market. There's no reason why we couldn't go for higher value added products and produce in Mauritius for the region, for example. So I think that's the kind of challenges that the COVID has brought, and make us think more regionally. Maybe go for a regional label. We have a Mauritian label, but maybe it would be a good idea to go for a regional branding, and so that we are more integrated in the region. So that's for our industrial cluster. we also export alcohol to the region in bulk. There as well, I think there are opportunities to create partnerships with some regional players to add value to our products and maybe create brands that could be developed in this fantastic and growing regional market. As far as electricity production is concerned, we have a project in Rwanda currently, and in the hydro sector. And there again, I think there are plenty of opportunities to develop this sector. So that's some of our challenges in terms of our industrial cluster. We are also involved in property development with the Mon Trésor project, which is a platform next to the airport. It's a 400 hectares piece of land which is next to the airport, with a master plan which provides for work, live and play. And there in this master plan, there's also a platform that is provided for freeport activities. As you know, Mauritius is very well placed because we have a very efficient port, which is very close to our airport. The links from the sea to air, it's a highway, so there's a corridor there which could be very efficient. And so operators would be welcome to come here and have some industries set up. Just a few figures in terms of volumes of trade. The free port in Mauritius, it's over last year, the trade volumes was over 500,000 tons, a trade value of, I would say, almost $1 billion. So it is a very promising sector, and I think it's only the beginning where this industry could be further developed and use the connectivity of Mauritius, the sea connectivity, and obviously the air connectivity to the continent. So I think that's where, I mean, basically my intervention was focused on. So really go back to basics, think local, think regional, integrate the economies, get better connectivity and more transactions to flow between the regional countries. Thank you very much, Amédée.
Well, thank you, Jacques. I think what you have said adds to what Dr. Sibanda said in terms of the investment flowing from Mauritius into a number of African countries. You have mentioned your energy project, the hydro project in Rwanda. So what basically we are hearing from the different speakers is that Mauritius may be an island, but Mauritius is in a position to take you into the continent, onto the continent, for better business, for expanding business, and to find the right partners. Some of the partners are in Mauritius and some of the partners are in Africa. We do work with African partners, obviously, to ensure that the projects get the adequate capacity to be able to bring the fruits that it needs to bring. I'm receiving quite a number of questions. I will have 3 questions later from Tatiana from Moscow, who is addressed to Lilowtee, Ken, let me see, Ken, Lilowtee, and I think Jacques. I also have a question concerning the free port to be used as a base for trading with mainland Africa. I have a free question on cloud computing that will go to Ken. So I will take these questions after the last 2 speakers, And now I have the pleasure to call on Monique Labat. Monique is the director of Monique Labat Consulting Private Limited, which operates from South Africa. She's been strongly connected with the Durban Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the City of Durban Investment Promotion Agency, as well as Trade Point South Africa, Durban. Monique, you have the microphone now.
Thank you, Mr. Daga, for your introduction. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm privileged and humbled to join the webinar, and I thank you for the opportunity. Having been born in Mauritius, I hold dual citizenship, Mauritian and South African. And with COVID-19, although I'm here based in Durban, I'm looking forward to the time when I can get back to the island to follow up on B2B and market linkages. So this evening, we are going to explore the digital and circular economy. The alternative to a traditional linear economy where we make, we use, we dispose is the circular economy. Here, we keep resources in use for as long as possible. We extract the maximum value from them whilst in use. We then recover and we regenerate products and materials at the end of each service life. This circular economy is critical towards sustainable development, towards resources circulation and conservation, and then this involves cascading these used resources to prevent waste occurrence. This then transforms the resulting residual streams into new or secondary resources. So to evaluate the success achieved, one needs to consider the far-reaching results which Mauritius has demonstrated in the circular economy. Several circular economy projects have been completed in the field of industrial waste management, namely the Energy Efficiency and Energy Conservation Industry Project and the Industrial Waste Assessment Project. For small islands like Mauritius, where space is scarce, and where landfills are reaching their maximum capacity, every success achieved on the island means being closer to attaining the Sustainable Development Goals. Workplace norms we once knew are a thing of the past. In light of COVID-19, businesses need to change the way they operate to be safe and to remain competitive. It's evident that digital transformation is on the rise. But for many companies, remaining remote is not necessarily a long-term option. And here, Africa's progress is very much dependent on some key trends, namely the growing consumer market. And we've heard from the other panelists the interventions throughout Africa. The population of the continent is projected to reach 1.7 billion by 2030. Another interesting fact is that the 10 countries with the most youthful populations are all African-based, and by 2050, it's predicted that 30% of the world's under 25s will be African. But even more interesting is that over 500 million Africans are subscribed to mobile services. Fast urbanization, rising income, and purchasing power of the population are already spurring growth markets in a range of sectors where Africans have unmet needs. And here we are looking at food, beverages, pharmaceuticals, financial services, healthcare, and education. Mobile financing solutions, that is the number of broadband connections and mobile traffic data across Africa, is continuously on an upward trend. Mobile banking accounts have now crossed the 200 million mark and are still growing. This trend will allow companies to improve productivity, to speed up their transactions, and to access wider markets. However, we need to equip innovators and more researchers with data, with tools, and with technical expertise in order for them to move sustainability to the next level. Now, COVID-19 has demonstrated substantial increases in online purchases. Numerous businesses deviated from their traditional business operations. They created online storefronts, and this in turn created opportunities for additional delivery, additional logistics, and additional packaging services. Businesses must have been asking themselves, how big of a box is needed for a given product? Was a box needed at all? So let's imagine how the digital economy can be harnessed and how machine learning algorithms can be applied to arrive at the best possible packaging choices for deliveries. Artificial intelligence, we know, can identify which products do not need packaging at all and which smaller products are deemed suitable for something as simple as an envelope. Computer-aided engineering helps redesign the boxes to use less material while making sure that the customer orders are protected. These improvements reduce volume per shipment, which means less unnecessary packaging and more efficient use of all forms of transportation, thereby reducing carbon in small amounts to create a larger impact across the network. So the development, the production, and the maintenance of these circular products requires a specialized workforce, which will increase jobs. In a circular economy, we know that labor is valued more than raw materials. As a result, employment grows in a circular economy. Jobs will expand for labor-intensive recycling and high-quality repairs. Jobs will expand in the logistics sector through local product take-back. Jobs will expand in new enterprises through innovation, through the service economy, and through new business models. A final important factor in the economic benefits of the circular economy is the change in and better understanding of the demand side. How companies deal with their customers and the role they play throughout their lives ultimately leads to less use of raw materials, thereby less waste generation, as well as a changing production in business. So we need to consider minimizing waste, increasing recycling, and providing options for our customers to reuse, repair, and recycle their products, thereby sending less material to the landfill and more back into the circular economy loop. In closing, and in evaluating the successes achieved in sectors other than the digital and circular economy, my company has had the good fortune of undertaking numerous business-to-business linkages between Kenya, Mauritius's neighboring island of Reunion, South Africa, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe. These B2B linkages have included securing markets for FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods, manufactured in both Zimbabwe and South Africa. It's also taken the renewable energy sector, as well as identifying and securing markets for the footwear and textiles manufactured in Mauritius into South Africa. So the Mauritius Africa strategy post-COVID discussion that we're having here today, Mr. Daga, is timeless. I would like to thank Mon Trésor Smart City for arranging the webinar, along with yourself, sir, as moderator, and my fellow panelists for their insights. The adoption of the digital and circular economy is the vehicle which will take you on a good business journey. I thank you for your attention.
Amidi, you're on mute.
Thank you so much, Monique, for this very compelling presentation about the imperative of the digital and circular economy. Indeed, while you were talking, I was reminded and I'm saying that for those in our audience who do not know the African landscape, that Africans, for reason of economic constraints, have been used, but at an informal level, to recycle things as much as possible because they could not buy new ones. So now what you're talking about is in the spirit of the African, but we need to scale it up. We need to modernize it. We need to take it at a much higher level, and we can do it. Africans, we can do it. We as Africans can do it. But obviously, we need the partnership of those who are already developing the technology, who have the know-how from elsewhere, the investors that would come alongside us to move in the direction of the digital and circular economy. Let me now call on Sridhar Nagarajan, who is the Regional Managing Director of IQEQ. Now, this company, which has got this peculiar name IQEQ, is actually one of the major players in the investor services sector with an international footprint and is responsible for the African region headquarters in Mauritius. Sridhar is a 2-decade experienced banker with exposure to India and to Africa. Sridhar is also the current chair of the Financial Services Commission Task Force on Global Business, is one of the founders of the Global Finance Mauritius, the apex industry body. He also chaired in the past the Mauritius Bankers Association Committee on SME Development and International Banking. Sridhar, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Amidi, and it's been a pleasure listening to my co-panelists and who has covered quite a lot of sectors from the real economy, both from the Mauritius side and the continental African side. It's sort of fitting that I can now wrap this up in terms of presenting it from the financial sector side, which I'm in this panel, I'm representing the global business sector and the international financial sector. Being an ex-banker, I can talk about that because the financial sector pretty much weaves through the real economy, and it plays a very significant role in terms of facilitating growth in an economy. Now, coming to the main theme of what was presented, how this whole segment of global business has helped in the past and how it's going to work going forward. Just want to share with you a couple of themes. The first theme I want to share with you is business facilitation. Actually, the most important role Mauritius has been playing to the continent of Africa is business facilitation. And why is that so important? Because Africa is referred by all economists as if it's a country. It's not that the economists don't know that it's not a country, because Africa is, even if you just take sub-Saharan Africa, which constitutes around 50 countries, the entire economy of the sub-Saharan Africa, if you just put together, it is still around 2% of the global economy. That still includes South Africa and Nigeria, which are very large. So which means that while Africa is the future and this century belongs to Africa, humongous potential, as mentioned by Monique in her presentation, 500 million mobile subscribers, a youthful continent. However, the markets are still fragmented and they are still smaller by global standards from an investment perspective. So it's always required when there is a fragmented market opportunity, you need a business facilitator. It's nothing new. Singapore played this role to Asia when Asia was quite fragmented. Today, it's not fragmented. There are individual giants in Asia. Dubai plays the role even today for Middle East. So Mauritius has been playing this role for Africa. And as Africa moves into the new era of its own growth, even post-COVID, we believe that the role of Mauritius vis-a-vis continental Africa will only be strengthened as a business facilitator. To just give you some context to what I'm saying, As per the information available up to 2018 published by the Financial Services Commission, cumulatively, investors has invested in Africa through the Mauritius International Financial Center, and that amount is $36.4 billion. And if you take this investments has gone into almost the entire African continent through the Mauritian International Financial Center, and it has been facilitated by the global business sector and the banking sector in Mauritius. If you just to give you an idea, the top 5 geographies which have from that particular ranking is South Africa, Nigeria, Democratic Republic of Congo, Mozambique, Kenya, and the list goes on. And when you come to sectors where we have facilitated business through getting in global capital into Africa, the largest sector is real estate. The second comes metals and mining. Third is oil and gas. Fourth is health and Medicare. And fifth is diversified group. It means they are conglomerates in which portfolio investments have been made. And then continues agriculture, trading, retail, all the sectors come. So that gives you an idea of the role Mauritius has been playing in the last 2 decades as an international financial center, while part of Africa just as a hub economy, facilitating these flows for Africa. Now, coming to touch another important area, particularly when it comes to Africa, because it's a developing continent, is how the same investment when it comes to enhancing impact investments. There has been a recent survey from GIN Annual Impact Survey 2019, which says that of the $500 billion which has gone towards impact investing across the globe, 14% has gone to sub-Saharan Africa, which is a pretty large sum. And a majority of this investment into Africa, particularly in impact investment, has gone through the Mauritius International Financial Center. DIFCs across the globe use Mauritius to make impact investing, because in impact investing, it's going for a particular purpose. The cost is very important and the facilitation has to be smooth. And that is another role which Mauritius has been playing, and it will continue to play in terms of facilitating how you can transform societies within Africa. Now, moving forward, if you ask how would all this move into the next 10, 20, 30 years, we believe the role of Mauritius with respect to facilitating Africa will only keep transforming and maturing as it goes, as Africa matures. Africa is already seeing a lot of intra-Africa flow. If you can see, many of our clients and Dr. McLean had presented Bigen. So there's a lot of entities which are African entities present in these continents who have Pan-Africa ambitions, need a base actually to do their business. One of that aspect was again covered by Dr. McLean in terms of you need a single currency to move through so many continents, and that currency obviously has to be a global currency. So many African corporates which Pan-Africa presence usually place their Pan-Africa activities through Mauritius. So it's a highly facilitating, including large South African conglomerates. Then we have funds, large funds which are actually investing across Africa, which actually base themselves, set up the collective investment schemes in Mauritius and invest in Africa, because then it's much easier for them to manage the flows, move from one investment to the other. And that's something which we do. In terms of if you move ahead in that direction and see where we are going, Mauritius has done an amazing job through the COVID crisis to open up the economy. While you may all see it as a small issue, it's not, because it's a small island, and for a small island to open up an economy needs a big heart. Ms. Lilowtee covered it. In the recent budget, right in the middle of COVID, in June, the government has made it so easy for foreign professionals. So African professionals can today come, live and work in Mauritius. Their spouses can work without any additional permit. They can bring their parents. They can actually purchase property, which was extremely restricted. And now occupation permit can be offered for 3 to 10 years. When you see all these things put together with the role Mauritius plays in continental Africa, it's a powerful proposition. The other area where Mauritius is moving, even before the crisis, and it'll move more because fintech is particularly, Jacques mentioned it, how this session itself is facilitated in terms of connectivity, is the Financial Services Commission has taken a huge step when it came with the regulatory sandbox license. We are facilitating fintech innovation for entities to actually who are into fintech innovation, and many of them are in Africa, to set up their base in Mauritius so that they can access a Pan-Africa market. Already the fintech sector in Africa is pretty large. It's $3 billion. It's assessed at $3 billion at sub-Saharan level in 2020. Mauritius has taken the lead in digital asset custodian. We are looking at many areas where we can actually facilitate a digital first Africa, particularly from the regulatory perspective. Not the real innovation in fintech is actually happening in mainland Africa. The last place where I would like to cover where Mauritius is going to play a significant role is, while we all are quite concerned with what's happening to the economy in the current scenario, we shouldn't forget that Mauritius in the last 10 years, Africa in the last 10 years has had a very good decade. There has been strong growth across Africa, which means that affluence and surplus capital has been created in the hands of Africans. And normally this capital needs to be reinvested into the economy, and the way it's done is through private equity. And the way to facilitate that affluence to get in is family offices. And Mauritius came with the Financial Services Act amendment in 2017, where overseas family office setup license was created. And as recently, the Financial Services Family Offices Rule 2020 has been issued, which actually facilitates the use of this capital, setting up a family office and plowing it back into investment as private equity and other type of ventures into Africa. So I'm aware that we are running out of time, so I'm going to stop there, and that gives you an idea how the global business sector and the banking sector, particularly, that ABSA has made a big investment into Mauritius, and today it is one of the top 3 banks in Mauritius as it took over Barclays Mauritius, a very, very important institution in Africa. The connectivity, even in the financial world, with mainland Africa is only increasing. And if you see IQEQ, which is the 4th largest investment services firm, has actually based itself, and now we are growing our presence across Africa. So if you really see that connectivity is increasing, and we will continue to play a role which the financial sector needs to play to the real sector. So maybe I'll stop here and pass on the floor to you. Thank you very much for the opportunity provided from Mon Trésor.
Thank you so much, Sridhar. That was extremely clear and loud. And I will immediately move to the questions that I've received. I'll start with one question from Bruges International, the director of Bruges International, Mrs. Tatiana. Bruges International, I understand, operates from Russia and Spain. And that question is addressed to Jacques, namely, could you see your company, Omnicane, as an investor or a participant in a project for the introduction of innovation for new heavy industries in Mauritius? That's a question addressed to Jacques. Are you on, Jacques, please?
Thank you, Amédée. Thank you very much for the question. Obviously, we will be very interested, and we have to dig a bit more into it and know exactly what it's all about. But we always welcome partnerships and opportunities for growth.
Now, I'll take another question, which is I think, addressed both to Lilowtee and to Ken. What can be the specific advantage of having a base for trading in Mauritius than having a base on mainland Africa? That's an interesting question for you, Ken. Let me put it to Ken. There's another one for Lilowtee later.
Thank you very much for this question. I think one of the the positive points about Mauritius is that I would say our geographic positioning and also the track record that we have. And one aspect which is important is that in Mauritius, we are a very well diversified and broad-based economy, which means that there are a number of professional services across the island, banks that are able to do businesses across the continent. And also, I would say that the advantages of Mauritius is that we are probably one of the countries that have managed over the years to negotiate and have agreements, bilateral agreements and international agreements with a number of groupings, including with COMESA, with SADC. We're now having the Continental Free Trade Agreement. We have a long-standing relationship with Europe and also under the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. And perhaps moving forward, there is also the FTA with China and India, Comprehensive Economic Partnership with India. So what I'm trying to say is that although Mauritius is a small country, we are in a position today to address a global market, which comprises with the existing groupings of 26% of the world population. If we add China and India to it, it increases to over 50%. So this is a compelling advantage, I would say, for why companies should look at. The second aspect is that there has been tremendous progress made in terms of the business environment and the business climate. So from 2006, we've engaged in a number of reforms, which has made it easier for a company to incorporate a business in Mauritius. We have a tax system, which is quite, I would say, simple. We also have no exchange controls, which is important for investors. But above all, I would say that the judiciary, the independence of the judiciary and the private council offers a lot of comfort to international investors. So these are some of the points that I would put forward for anyone that wants to locate in Mauritius and do business from Mauritius into Africa.
Well, let me call on you again, Ken, to address the question from Dr. Erdogan from Turkey, who asked basically two things. One, what are the opportunities in Mauritius as a gateway to Africa for foreign companies? And together with that question, potential for collaboration in logistics, air connectivity, and warehousing. I'll let you answer the question and then I'll add on to what you're going to say, because I was part of the team that negotiated the trade agreement with bilateral trade agreement with Turkey, and I have some ideas about the potential. So Ken, if you wish to take that question.
Yes, I think over the years, Amede, we have, and thank you for the question, we have over the years emerged as an international financial center. And I would say that Mauritius today is probably the only investment-grade international financial center in sub-Saharan Africa. If we look at the rating of Mauritius, which is Baa1 by the credit rating agencies with a stable outlook, Mauritius is one of the 4 investment-grade countries in sub-Saharan Africa, along with Botswana, Morocco, and Namibia. And there has been already a track record for international businesses. There has also been a number of reforms done to make sure that Mauritius is recognized as an ideal financial center by a number of international investment funds, private equities, investment holdings, and also many institutional investors that have chosen Mauritius. I would say that these are the points, and there are obviously a lot of improvements that we are doing, especially on the AML-CFT norms, to make sure that we are compliant. But overall, I would say that Mauritius has a track record already in terms of positioning itself as a center for international financial finance. The second question in terms of collaboration and connectivity, there are obviously a number of initiatives, and the free trade agreement between Mauritius and Turkey has been signed. There are a number of companies now that are setting up in Mauritius for the domestic market, but also looking at the regional market. The air connectivity is something which we at the level of the EDB, we would be keen to look at how there could be an increase in terms of connectivity, for example, Turkish airline. There are certain possibilities for us to look at how we can drive more businesses between Turkey, Mauritius, and into the mainland Africa. There are certain strategic alliances we have nurtured with associations based in Turkey. So we are open to the ideas of further collaboration in that space.
Well, thank you, Ken. Let me just add two further points to your answer. One, in concrete terms, Mauritius is one of the only countries, if my memory serves me well, to have a trade, one of the only African countries to have a trade agreement, bilateral trade agreement with Turkey. I don't think Turkey has had trade agreements with countries, especially on Eastern and Southern Africa. So Mauritius can be a gateway for Turkish production based in Mauritius, either wholly or partly produced in Mauritius, provided you reach this level of origination that allows you to get the certificate of origin, which is 30%, 35% value addition. I think it would be to the interest of Turkish companies, those producing goods, to set up in the free port of Mauritius, to set up in the manufacturing sector. And as explained earlier by Ken, you benefit from the 3% fiscal advantage and get preferential access through Mauritius if you have the required value addition to get onto the regional market of Eastern and Southern Africa. In terms of logistics, I remember that the issue was already being thought about, and that was mentioned earlier during the presentation, that Mauritius would like to see the emergence of a cargo hub from Mauritius to service the landlocked African countries, which landlocked African countries have goods that they need to export also beyond to Europe. And Turkish airline, and I know there's a private Turkish air cargo airline that could consider, that could look into coming and setting up in Mauritius to take up that business. So here are two clear, concrete opportunities that I will put to answer that question. Let me now move to the next question. And the next question, I think, would go to Sridhar. That is the question of Helen, who asked, what impact do you believe the potential blacklisting of Mauritius by the EU will have on the Mauritian economy within the foreseeable future? Right? So that's to you, Sridhar.
Thank you. Thank you, Amedi, and thank you, Helen, for the question. It is, of course, the elephant in the room question. We believe that the way we have to address this is the reason why the blacklisting has been proposed is a few amount of effectiveness shortfall from the FATF findings. So out of the 58 parameters. On 55 parameters, Mauritius is absolutely fine. On 5 parameters, FATF found some shortcomings, predominantly on some legislatory gaps, particularly when it comes to money changers, jewelers, which has been fixed. If you know, the Parliament has passed the right legislations and the first reading has happened. When it comes to the global business sector, it was more about how the number of audits from the regulator, so that is also being taken care of. So the way we are addressing it is, even before COVID and through COVID, we have been working on it because we take these things very seriously, and we would be submitting our work done on all these aspects by 31st of August. The Africa plenary for FATF usually is held in September. We presume that it will continue because life goes on. And once that is done, the global plenary, and we are quite confident that because it's considered enhanced monitoring because of these things, it's nothing close to a blacklist. And the EU response was a little bit stronger than what it was. So we will also present it to the EU to take this forward. Now, to come to the impact of the blacklist, given I covered it in my presentation, Mauritius has a very important, and you cannot take that role out of what we play in Africa. Particularly, as I said, that we play a role in getting investments into Africa. We have been speaking to clients. Of course, clients are concerned about some of these things, but the way we will see this is we will still play a very significant role in terms of channelizing investments into Africa, because that's a role which is unique to what Mauritius plays. We will address whatever is required under the EU requirements. If it's enhanced KYC and other things, we will address it. So we believe that we'll be able to first solve the FATF issue. Full work has been done. Once that is done, we'll present that to EU and seek for their consideration. And if there is anything which comes out of it, we will handle it in a collaborative manner. Particularly given the role is quite unique and it is more accretive in value when it comes to impact investing and it comes to facilitating intra-Africa trade for Africa, and the jurisdiction by any standards is at a very high level compared to what it is being implicated as a blacklist. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Sridhar. I'll take 2 last questions now. I think we've run quite over time. One question is addressed to Lilowtee. It's a question about the warehouses being set in Kenya, Mozambique, and Tanzania. The author of the question says it's a wonderful idea, but on what premises did we choose the countries, and how will the partners be chosen for establishing these warehouses? Lilowtee, could you tackle those 2 questions?
Correct. Thank you, Mr. Daga. The reason why we have chosen these countries is that because it's on the eastern coast. Actually, we know the potential that the African market can have for our export and manufacturing sector, but we wanted to do it in a prudent manner. And the Eastern African countries is close to Mauritius. We have the connectivity, and we have been exporting to South Africa, which are also supplying these countries directly through their distribution channels. So those countries know a bit of our product in terms of quality and prices. So we said, let's start with those countries first. And thereon, if the concept of warehousing works in terms of market penetration strategy, then we will look at other countries as well. So basically, we were motivated by a prudent approach first, rather than going exponentially over Africa and not meeting our target. How do we choose our partners for those to work with our warehouses? First of all, if it is in our partners for the warehouses in those countries, eventually we are open to any proposals, and we will consider those proposals based on some criteria. For the Mauritian companies there, we are actually working with all the exporters. Whoever want to export to those countries via the warehouses are encouraged to contact us. We will be doing a market survey for them, and of course we will do also a prospection mission in those countries as well. So we have a methodology established at MEXA that we will drive our potential exporters through that process to make them ready to export via the warehousing model to those specific countries. Thank you, Mr. Daga.
Thank you, Lilowtee. One last question. Now, those other questions which we are not taking up now will be taken privately. Your question will be circulated to those you have addressed them. For example, there's a question to Ken on the potential for investing in the development of artificial residential islands. Those questions will be answered directly by those to whom they have been addressed. But there's a last question I'd like to direct to Sridhar. It's about how do you see the AFCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area? How do you see that influencing the role of Mauritius in continuing to be a leading business facilitation center?
Thank you, Mehdi. I think it's a very good question. You know, some of the speakers who spoke today, I think Jacques spoke, and even Dr. McLean spoke about, see, whether we like it or not, the world is now slightly reversing from globalization, and it's more going towards nationalization is a strong word, but regionalization is a much more positive word. So what the Africa Free Trade Association agreement from the African Union is coming is a very, very strong, I would say, a positive development. It's almost post-COVID, it almost becomes a necessity that we make it a reality, because there is always strength when we stand together. And I mentioned to you all about how fragmented Africa is, but at the same time, Africa is resource rich, it's demographic rich. It can actually survive like an India or a China, because the domestic consumption of Africa, when you put it together, is a very powerful buttress against what's going to happen to the world post-COVID. So if you ask me personally, for me, the leaders should pursue and make it a reality as soon as possible. Of course, Mauritius can play a very important role, because such agreements again require payment systems, and you all know that Mauritius already is part of the South African SADC payment system. And so we ensure that we don't even use currencies where it can be difficult to bring that together. So in a nutshell, I would say it's a right pointing that question is, and we all should work towards that as influencers and stakeholders, so that that free trade agreement comes to reality, and it will really help Africa in a post-COVID world where everyone is looking internally. I'll leave it there, Mehdi, if you want to add anything, because I know you are extremely knowledgeable in this area. Thank you.
No, Sridhar, thank you for that. Let me close this webinar. Let me thank all those of you in the audience. Let me thank those of you who have sent questions. We have 34 questions, and as I said, these questions will be circulated to those to whom they'll be directed. Some of the questions I'll pick up myself and provide a response to you. Let me thank the speakers in this webinar: Ken Poonoosamy, Lilowtee Rajmun, Dr. McLean Sibanda, Jacques Juniorville, Monique Labat, and Sridhar Nagarajan. And let me finally thank Mon Trésor for having initiated and organized this webinar. Thank you all, and have a good day or evening wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.